What is an RIA solicitor agreement? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 132. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you start out by heading on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the RIA model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, on today's topic, we're going to be talking about what is a solicitor agreement. That's maybe a term you've heard, maybe a term you haven't heard before, but it is something that is essentially made available to advisors that transition their practice into the RIA model. And that might be something very appealing to you. So I want to talk about what it is, so you kind of have it maybe on your roadmap for, okay, hey, one of my motivations for maybe making that change would be able to have such solicitor arrangements in place. So what a solicitor arrangement, that's just kind of the regulatory term that's used, is think of that as a paid referral program, if you will. So with your practice, you might have centers of influence that you've built relationships with and that you refer clients to them, and then they maybe refer clients back to you. And maybe you have some of those that work very well. Oftentimes you kind of hear there's maybe some frustrations where some of them are more one-sided in the direction of which direction the referrals are going. But in the RIA space, you're absolutely able to still continue to do that and have your centers of influence and have your referral partners that you send folks back and forth to. What is allowed, though, and then we're going to get into kind of there's some semantics to this. If you desired to, you can actually make some of those referrals essentially a paid referral. So the referring partner, the center of influence that is referring someone to you can compensate them for that referral, perhaps to incentivize them to make those referrals. Perhaps, as we'll get into, because you've kind of joined forces, if you will, of how you kind of position yourselves maybe out in the marketplace. And it is what is called a solicitor arrangement that enables you to be able to do that, to have these paid referrals. So an example of where this can come into play is maybe you're the financial advisor, you're the RIA, and you have a center of influence that has a CPA practice. And the CPA, and this happens a lot, I talk to a lot of CPA practices that reach out to me on this sort of thing, and they say, hey, a lot of our clients ask about, hey, can we help them with their investment needs? And they have these assets that need to be invested and planned for and all those sorts of things. And perhaps the CPA firm doesn't desire to do that in-house, or they just recognize they do not have the expertise or the capacity to do that in-house. And so what they do is they perhaps work with an RIA on a solicitor arrangement that they say, hey, we're going to refer those clients and those needs to you. You're going to help them with that part of the equation, the financial plan and the asset management, all the things that you do as an RIA, the value add. And for that, let's work out some sort of economic arrangement for that. And I'll give you examples of what that typically is. But kind of how a CPA, and this is just one example, but how they can position that to their clients is to say, hey, clients, we've realized you have needs beyond the specific tax planning or tax resources that we provide for you. But we also realize that is our expertise, is the tax side. And instead of trying to become experts on the investment side, we realize there are just better resources out there that are experts on that, more so than we could ever be in-house ourselves. And so as opposed to trying to build out a wealth management or advisory arm to our practice, hey, we've partnered with this third-party wealth management firm, and we do have an arrangement of where we refer folks to them, and let me tell you all about it, and here's why we think that's something you should explore. So that's a way that a CPA practice, as an example, could kind of set up what that relationship is, and it's a very valid thing. Now, there are CPA practices and tax planning practices that do ultimately build out their own advisory services in-house, and that's fine, and they might start their own RIA, but others, again, that whether through capacity or what they're passionate about, or just they sometimes just, hey, I want to stay in my lane and rely on someone else to do their part of it, that there is a way to potentially go into, again, this solicitor type arrangement. And this is actually something any RIA can do. in theory, and any advisor under an RIA can do. The question, though, is if you're under another RIA, will they essentially allow you to do it? So if you are at a large wirehouse firm, you are technically under a broker-dealer and an RIA, and that's just a very large RIA. So when you open a fee-based account, you're under the RIA side of things, often referred to as the corporate RIA. And as with any RIA, your very large RIA you work for has the ability to potentially put solicitor arrangements in place, but they have just maybe chosen not to for whatever all the reasons. So this is not necessarily something, if you have fee-based accounts now, you're under some sort of RIA now, this is not necessarily something from a regulatory perspective that you have to move to your own RIA, for example, to obtain, but with your own RIA, it gives you the ability to implement this if you want, or if you were to join an RIA, you'd want to inquire with them and say, hey, is that something I can do under your RIA? So a couple things that you kind of have to think about if you were to put something like this into place, or this is as you're kind of thinking about, wow, if I were to transition into the model, is this something I would want to do? And for simplicity, so I don't have to keep giving all these different scenarios, we'll kind of talk as if you were starting your own RIA and kind of what those steps would be. So the first kind of main variable to be aware of with solicitor arrangements is there are compliance responsibilities, things that must be done a certain way to do this properly and not run afoul of the regulations. So as an example, number one, it has to be disclosed to clients. That's the first step, and that's typically in the ADV. And if you're not aware, the ADV Part 2, every RIA's ADV Part 2 has a specific section that outlines whether they have essentially a solicitor agreement. And so many RIAs, the answer is we do not have any of those. But you can look up any RIA and see if the answer is we do not have any of those, or if they do have them, they are having to disclose it in their document, which is a publicly available document and is given to the clients of the firm to see, okay, is there an arrangement in place here with does the RIA have a solicitor arrangement in place? Next, the impacted client that's being referred. Again, you want to make sure full disclosure to the client. They understand, hey, the CPA and I, we have a paid referral arrangement. And again, however you position it, I gave the example a moment ago, but the client has to acknowledge that and write in. So part of if you were to set up a solicitor arrangement, and typically your compliance consultant firm you've hired to help you set up and manage your compliance on an ongoing basis. I've done all kinds of episodes on that topic. You rely on them to help you get all this documentation in place, but you do need basically an acknowledgement form signed by that client, and they understand that there is this paid referral relationship in place. So that's kind of the second compliance component. And then, of course, just kind of related from a compliance record keeping perspective is if you were to do something, you then, of course, need to keep track of all of this. So if you have an arrangement with, again, I keep picking on a CPA firm, if they were to refer clients, you need to keep track of who they've referred over. You need to keep track of who actually became clients. You need to keep track of whatever the compensation arrangement is, which I'll give examples of here. Keep track and actually facilitate the payments back to them. So there's some record keeping that goes along with that as well. And to the degree you have this in place, it is reasonable the regulators, if they see on your ADV, hey, you have such an arrangement in place, when they come out to examine you, they very likely might ask you questions about it and would just want to see good record keeping and documentation of where the client acknowledged that the arrangement and those sorts of things. So there are some compliance parameters, not really a big deal to put into place, something you would just rely on your compliance consultant firm to help you with, but you absolutely have to make sure you do that and make sure you do it correctly. So then the next part of the kind of variables to think through is, well, what sort of arrangement would you have with this? This is essentially solicitor that's sending you clients. And there's not really any rules on this. That's the nice thing, is you can kind of structure this with whatever works best for you, works best for your referring partner, works best for your clients. And so the typical, and again, it's typical, it's not to say you have to do it this way. The typical arrangement is usually to share some basis points back to the referring partner, or it could be a percentage point. And so an example, and this is often what's used out there, is 25 basis points. So it's, hey, I'm the CPA. Hey, I refer this client to you, RIA. You're going to do all of your services. You're going to charge your fee, or maybe your 1% fee, and 25 basis points of your 100 basis points in this example, you're going to pay back to me on an ongoing basis. That's kind or if you do that on a percentage basis, they happen to charge you, if you happen to charge exactly 1%, 25% of the fee comes out to that same 25 basis points. But you could do it on basis points. You could do it as a percent of the fee. But that's something you work out with your referring partner that you both agree to and say, okay, hey, this works for us. But just to give you an idea, that 25 bips, 25% is kind of the typical going rate out there. But by all means, you could do less, you could do more. Again, it's just what makes sense for both parties. And in particular, you need to make sure that because you are sharing some of your revenue with this party, that the remaining economics still work for you and make it a profitable relationship. So, but just to give you kind of a baseline on what that is. Now, that is the typical way is this ongoing 25 bips or 25%. You could do something as simple as a one-time fee. You could say, hey, if you refer someone to me and they become a client and they, bring their assets to me, I give you a one-time fee of X. So that's just another example. There's a lot of flexibility in how you do it. Again, it's just, it all has to be disclosed and it has to work for kind of all parties involved. But knowing that the more typical approach is that 25 bips, 25% kind of fee, a couple things. Keep in mind, some arrangements are perpetual. So, hey, CPA firm refers someone to you, you guys agree on 25 basis points, and that fee is in perpetuity. This year, next year, every year after that, as long as you have the client. Others set up the arrangement I've seen where it's, hey, it's perpetual, essentially up until, say, 5 years. And so I guess I shouldn't use the word perpetual. It's, hey, you refer the client, and for the first maybe 5 years that the client is with you, RIA, you pay 25 basis points back to the referring party. So there's kind of an end date on it. Again, you have the flexibility. Do you want to do perpetual or do you want to do an end date? And then I've seen others that, again, kind of get a little creative and they say, hey, I'm willing to do this as the RIA, and they're talking to their potential referral source. I'm willing to do this essentially perpetual, and we'll maybe do 25 basis points. However, that's under the circumstances that you send me at least X referrals a year or something. And what they're getting at is not to force some number of referrals, but basically to say, hey, if you refer some people to me and it works out, which is great, and then maybe next year you refer some more people, and then for whatever reason you stop referring, for whatever your circumstances are, well, I'm not just going to pay you for the next 20 years when we're no longer really actively having this referral arrangement. You did, yes, you sent them over, but you stopped referring people to me. So I have seen others that they don't necessarily put a set time limit on it, like 5 years, but they do have terms that, again, and it needs to be remain an active referral relationship. And as long as it does, those referral fees continue to be paid back in perpetuity, again, as long as that relationship stays active. So you do have some flexibility. It is something you'd want to think through of how to put it in place. I'm happy to kind of share with you if you have questions on what I've seen. I've given some examples out there of what I've seen work with advisors and their referring partners. And then just the final note on this, and this doesn't necessarily cover everything to do with solicitor arrangements and solicitor agreements and the documentation. Ultimately, again, you need and want to work with a compliance consultant firm on that. But if any of this sounds appealing and you say, okay, hey, this is maybe a way to generate new clients and grow the firm, I am a believer, you make sure you control your process. So you and retain kind of ownership of that client process. And so if you've built your firm up until what it is now, you presumably have a process for how you work with prospective clients, perhaps that first conversation, that first meeting, how you maybe work them through kind of a prospecting stage, how you maybe onboard them, how you then work with them on a going forward basis after that. And I have seen or heard kind of scenarios where an advisor had that locked in and that worked for them, and then maybe a referring party tried to kind of start dictating to the RIA how they should maybe do things. And there does need to be some degree of partnership, particularly, again, that CPA example, because if it's like, hey, I'm the CPA, I'm going to do all this tax stuff, you're going to do the advisory work, but we do need to work in concert together on the tax planning part of all that. And that's why we're kind of coming together on this. That is a reasonable thing to expect and to need to be able to accommodate. And you want to just kind of really clearly define on the front end with a referring partner what those expectations are. But I would just caution you to the degree then they then try to tell you like, oh, hey, you need to meet with this client 3 times a year or something like that. And they're trying to dictate to you your process of how you work with clients, how you onboard clients, or how you kind of work them through that prospecting funnel. I am a believer, if your process works for you, don't let someone else dictate what it is. And if someone's trying to do that, that's probably not going to be a good referral partner for you. That is going to create issues down the line. Again, you do need to find that middle ground of where there is some kind of overlap. And that's the whole reason you're doing this. But be very protective of what your process is, and don't let anyone dictate to you how to do things. That's just a suggestion. It's not a regulatory requirement or anything like that, but something I've just seen, and I think it's important that you think through as well. So with that, like I said at the top, my name is Brad Wells with Transition to RIA. Talking about this sort of thing is something I discuss with advisors all the time of what are the additional things you can do if you were to transition your practice into the RIA model? What additional flexibility do you have? Kind of services, investment solutions, whatever your value prop is. And hey, how might you grow your practice if you had your own RIA or you joined an RIA, whether because you have more flexibility with how you market your services, or perhaps today's topic does entice you that, hey, maybe I do want to set up a paid referral arrangement with some of my centers of influence, and maybe that would motivate them to send me more referrals, and that would be a win-win for both sides. That's certainly part of exploring the RIA model is, hey, what do I have now available to me? What can or can't I do now? What do the economics look like now? What are my flexibility now? And what would my practice look like in that potential future state if I were to transition into the model? Again, that's what I help advisors with all day long. Happy to have that conversation with you as well. First things first, though, if you head on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all the resources I make available for this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, and at the top of every page is a contact link. If you click on that, you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic or anything else RIA related. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.